Whether you're here to unwind, get inspired, or simply enjoy a good story, we're so glad you're spending your time with us today. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let us know. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Now, sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's tale. I had always prided myself on being a simple man. I wasn't one for drama, big gestures, or drawn-out confrontations. My life was grounded in routine, in finding comfort in the familiar, and in my marriage to Jessica. We had met in college, a place where I'd been more focused on my studies than anything else, and she had been the bright, ambitious woman who caught my eye. I admired her independence, her drive to make something of herself in the world. We had always felt like a perfect match, two people whose worlds just fit together. Our relationship hadn't been without its flaws, of course. I knew we had our differences. Jessica, like most people, had her occasional bouts of insecurity, though she hid it well. She was fiercely protective of her family, especially her sister, Lily, who was the exact opposite of her. Free-spirited, spontaneous, and a bit unpredictable. Jessica and I had our usual disagreements, nothing major, but she could sometimes be controlling, and I, on the other hand, tended to withdraw into myself when things got tough. It was a cycle that had always seemed manageable, something we'd learned to navigate. At least that's what I thought. In a way, I had always been the silent observer in my relationship. I wasn't the loud, outgoing type who made waves. Instead, I was content to support Jessica in whatever she needed, to be the rock in our home. I was an accountant, methodical, practical, and detail-oriented. My life revolved around structure, numbers, and predictability. And in the beginning, our marriage reflected that. But as time went on, the cracks in our marriage became more noticeable. I began to see signs of a growing distance between us. Jessica seemed to become more preoccupied with her family's needs than with us as a couple. Her career had taken off, and her ambition, something I had once admired, began to overshadow everything else. We rarely had time for ourselves anymore, and when we did, she was often distracted, her mind somewhere else. It wasn't until the wedding day that I fully understood just how much things had changed. I had always been a quiet observer, but this time I couldn't ignore what I was seeing in Jessica. Her anxiety was palpable. There was a nervous energy to her that I couldn't place, and I wondered whether it was just the pressure of her sister's wedding or something more. Her hesitation in the morning, the way her eyes darted around the room, the way she avoided my gaze whenever I tried to speak to her. All these small things built up in my mind. There was something wrong, but I never imagined it could be this wrong. Lily's wedding had been an event I had been looking forward to, not because I was particularly close to her. She was Jessica's younger sister, after all, but because it was supposed to be a celebration of family, of love, of new beginnings. I had known her fiancé for years, and I respected him as a man of character. Everything about that day was supposed to be about joy, about moving forward, and yet, standing at the edge of the hallway, I suddenly found myself questioning everything. I glanced over at Jessica, her eyes locked onto something far away as if she was trying to escape. In that moment, I realized that she wasn't just distracted by her sister's wedding. There was something more, something deeper at play, but I couldn't bring myself to ask. The tension was too thick to cut through. In my mind, I was caught between disbelief and a sense of quiet determination. I had always been a patient person, a man who believed in the sanctity of marriage and the value of working through difficulties. But in the pit of my stomach, I felt a sense of betrayal so sharp it was almost unbearable. And then Jessica spoke. The words, the confession, felt like a bolt of lightning in my chest. They shattered the quiet facade of our life, exposing a reality I hadn't known existed. I had no idea how to respond, no idea how to process what she had just told me. My heart, which had always been steady and unyielding, was now in turmoil. But there was something else, something that nagged at me. Despite my anger, despite the wave of emotions crashing over me, I felt the undeniable urge to understand. I wasn't ready to throw everything away. I wasn't ready to give up on my marriage. And though the questions had started to pile up, I knew there was more to this story. What was the truth behind this betrayal? What had led Jessica to make such a devastating choice? And how could I navigate this storm when it seemed like everything I believed in was suddenly crumbling? The world I had built, the life I had carefully constructed with Jessica, was being tested in a way I could never have prepared for. And as the evening wore on, as the laughter and celebrations continued behind the closed doors of the reception hall, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were never going to be the same again. The laughter of children and the faint hum of a distant lawnmower filled the suburban air as I parked my car in the driveway of our modest yet charming two-story home. My name is Daniel, a 34-year-old marketing consultant who prides himself on being the dependable one, both at work and in my personal life. Friends often joked that I was the guy who could always be counted on to remember birthdays, help with moving, and show up when things got tough. Dependability is what I'd built my life around. My relationship with Emily had always felt solid, or at least I thought it had. We met 6 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue, bonding over our shared love of literature and a particular fondness for poorly made rom-coms. Emily had a spark to her, a kind of adventurous spontaneity that counterbalanced my measured approach to life. While I planned things down to the minute, she was the type to decide on a whim to drive 3 hours for a perfect sunset view. Our marriage, like any, wasn't without its flaws. My tendency to focus on work sometimes left Emily feeling neglected, while her impulsive nature could occasionally frustrate my need for order. But we had always found a way to meet in the middle, or so I believed. Our home was a reflection of us, a mix of Emily's artistic flair and my practical sensibilities. The living room boasted walls painted in warm, earthy tones that Emily had picked, accented by framed photographs of our travels. The bookshelves overflowed with her art books and my business literature, a testament to our shared yet distinct passions. And yet, beneath the surface, there were cracks I hadn't noticed. Emily had been distant lately, distracted even. I chalked it up to the stress of planning her sister Megan's wedding, an event that had consumed much of her time and energy. Megan and Emily were close, their bond strengthened after losing their parents in their teens. As such, Emily had taken on a near-maternal role in Megan's life, determined to ensure her sister's happiness. The wedding itself was a grand affair, held at a sprawling estate surrounded by lush gardens. Megan looked radiant in her flowing white gown, and Emily had been glowing with pride as she helped her sister prepare for the big day. I had thought this event would bring us closer, a reminder of our own vows. But now, I couldn't shake the feeling that the distance I'd noticed wasn't just stress. It was something deeper. Matt, the best man, had always been a part of my world. We'd met in college and remained close ever since. He was the kind of friend who could lighten the mood with a well-timed joke or offer genuine advice when things got tough. My wife and Matt got along well, too well, as I now realized with a sinking heart. The betrayal stung more because of who Matt was to me. He wasn't just a friend. He was a brother in every way that mattered. He had been my best man, standing beside me on the day I'd vowed to love and cherish Emily for the rest of my life. And yet, here I was, standing in the middle of a seemingly perfect wedding, grappling with the revelation that my wife had shared something intimate with him that should have been ours alone. As I walked through the estate's gardens, the magnitude of it all began to sink in. I'd built my identity around being the solid one, the guy who kept things together. But this felt like a foundation I couldn't repair. The irony wasn't lost on me. Megan's wedding was meant to be a celebration of love, loyalty, and trust. All the things I thought Emily and I had. Now, it felt like a cruel reminder of what I might never truly have. In the distance, I saw Emily rejoin the festivities, her face a mask of calm that belied the storm we'd just unleashed. She slipped back into the role of the doting sister, leaving me to wonder if I had ever really known her at all. And then there was Matt, raising his glass in a toast with that familiar grin that had always seemed so genuine. The sight of him made my stomach churn, but I kept my composure. Questions swirled in my mind, unanswered but insistent. How long had she carried this secret? Why tell me now? And, most importantly, what was I supposed to do with this knowledge? The world I thought I knew had shifted, and I had no idea what lay ahead. But one thing was certain. The person I had been before this moment was gone, replaced by someone grappling with betrayal, anger, and a painful sense of loss. In the days that followed Jessica's confession, the atmosphere at home was thick with unspoken words. I couldn't look at her without feeling a sting, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Every time I tried to sleep, I was haunted by images of Alex and Jessica together. Every glance, every touch, every whispered word between them that I had missed. I could almost feel their deceit in the air, lingering in every corner of the house. First, I tried to stay calm. I knew the next steps would determine everything, whether I could ever trust her again, whether I could salvage my marriage, or if I would walk away from it all. But the more I tried to think rationally, the more confused and angry I became. I couldn't wrap my mind around the fact that Jessica, the woman I thought I knew, had carried on this secret with Alex, the man who had been my closest friend for years. And yet, despite all the hurt, I still loved her. A part of me kept hoping it was a mistake, that maybe there was some explanation, something I hadn't understood. I wanted to believe in us again, but the weight of the lies was suffocating, and the distance between us was growing wider with each passing day. The first real conversation we had after the revelation was at the kitchen table, hours after I returned home from work. Jessica was sitting across from me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She had tried to apologize, again and again, but it felt hollow, like the words were rehearsed. She had known for so long what was happening, and now it felt like she was scrambling to fix something that was beyond repair. "I'm sorry," she repeated, her voice trembling. "I never meant to hurt you. I swear, I never meant for it to get this far." I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep my emotions from spilling out. But it did, and now everything is a lie. "I don't even know who you are anymore, Jessica." Her face crumpled as she wiped away another tear, but I didn't feel sympathy. Couldn't. The hurt was too raw, too fresh. She wasn't the woman I married. She had become someone else entirely, and I had been too blind to see it. "I'm trying to fix this. I know I've made mistakes, but we can work through this," she said, her voice desperate. I shook my head. "Work through this? How, Jessica? How do we go back to something that never existed in the first place?" I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. I needed space. I needed to think, to breathe. But instead of finding peace, I found myself spiraling deeper into the chaos that had been my life for the past few days. I tried to call Alex twice. Both times he didn't pick up. My mind raced, each unanswered call a loud, insistent reminder that I had been abandoned by the two people I trusted most in my life. It didn't matter how many times Jessica apologized or how many ways she promised to fix things. What mattered was that everything I thought I knew was gone. For a week I avoided Alex. I refused to answer his calls, barely even acknowledging his text messages. I didn't want to hear from him, and honestly, I wasn't ready to face him. The pain of knowing that my best friend had betrayed me in such a profound way was more than I could bear. But as the days passed, the unresolved anger inside me began to simmer and fester. I had to confront him. I had to know what he had to say for himself. When I finally agreed to meet with him, I was already seething with rage. I wanted answers, but more than that, I wanted him to feel the weight of what he had done. We agreed to meet at a local bar, the kind of place where we'd spent countless nights together over the years. It felt surreal to think of our friendship now, knowing that it was built on a lie. Alex was already there when I walked in, sitting in the corner booth, looking uncharacteristically nervous. When he saw me, he stood up as if to approach me, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Stay right there," I said, my voice cold and controlled. "We need to talk." He nodded, his face pale and eyes wide, but he didn't say a word as I made my way to the booth. As I sat down, I could feel the weight of the tension between us, thick enough to cut through. The space that once felt comfortable between us now seemed like an abyss. "Why?" I asked simply. "Why, Alex?" He swallowed hard, his eyes flickering away for a moment before meeting mine again. I never meant for it to happen this way. It just did. I could feel my blood boiling. "That's it? That's all you have to say for yourself? It just happened?" His eyes flickered, the guilt evident on his face. "I've been in love with her for years. I never meant to hurt you, but I couldn't keep pretending anymore." His words felt like a slap in the face, and I had to stop myself from standing up and walking out. But I stayed. I needed to hear this, to know how deep the betrayal ran. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded. "Why didn't you come to me? Why did you have to lie?" Alex leaned back, rubbing the back of his neck. "I was scared. I never wanted to lose you as a friend. And I thought, no, I convinced myself that if I stayed quiet, everything would eventually fall into place." "Fall into place?" I echoed, incredulous. "What about me, Alex? What about our friendship? Did that mean nothing to you?" For a moment he was silent. His eyes dropped to the table, and I saw the regret in his expression. "It meant everything," he said quietly, "but I made a choice, and I was too weak to face the consequences." I felt the weight of his words settle over me like a heavy cloak. There were no easy answers, no simple way to fix this. And as much as I wanted to walk away, to sever ties with him and Jessica forever, part of me couldn't. The history, the memories, the love I once had for them, it all lingered, making the decision harder. But I couldn't pretend, couldn't forgive, not yet. And as the conversation dragged on, I realized that I was no longer the same person I had been before. This wasn't just about a betrayal of trust. It was about the destruction of the life I thought I had built. As I left the bar, my mind was a blur of conflicting emotions. I didn't know how I would move forward, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. There was no going back. The battle was just beginning. The tension between Jessica and me had reached a breaking point. Every conversation felt like walking on eggshells. She was still apologizing, still begging for my forgiveness, but nothing could make up for what had happened. Every time I looked at her, I saw the betrayal etched in her eyes, and it was becoming impossible to ignore. I had made my mind up that we couldn't stay together, not with the weight of the lies hanging over us. But that all changed the night I received the text. It was late, around 11 p.m., and I was sitting on the couch, staring at the empty space next to me where Jessica had been sitting only moments before. The silence in the house felt suffocating. I had spent most of the day trying to figure out what I was going to do next, but the more I thought about it, the more confused I became. Should I stay and try to rebuild something from the ruins of our marriage? Or should I leave it all behind and move on? I reached for my phone when it buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. It was a message from Alex. The mere sight of his name made my chest tighten, but I opened the message anyway. "We need to talk. It's about Jessica." I stared at the text, my heart pounding. What could he possibly have to say now? After everything that had happened, what more could he reveal? I didn't want to meet him again, but the urgency in his message gnawed at me. Something in the pit of my stomach told me that this was no ordinary message. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before I typed back. "What is it?" His reply came almost immediately. "Meet me at the same bar. It's important. You'll want to hear this." I didn't know why, but something inside me couldn't resist. There was a weight to his words, an unsettling pull that I couldn't ignore. I grabbed my jacket and left without telling Jessica. I didn't want her to know. I wasn't sure what I was walking into, but I had to know. I had to hear what Alex had to say, even if I was already sick of all the lies. When I arrived at the bar, Alex was already waiting for me, sitting in the same booth as before. He was visibly shaken, his hands trembling as he took a sip from his drink. I sat down across from him, my eyes narrowing as I waited for him to speak. "You've got 5 minutes. Alex," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. He nodded, but there was an air of hesitation about him. "I didn't want to tell you this, but I have no choice anymore. You deserve the truth." I braced myself for what was coming, but nothing could have prepared me for what Alex was about to reveal. "I didn't start this affair with Jessica," he said, his voice low. "It wasn't what you think. She came to me, and it wasn't just about sex. He paused, his throat working as if the words were stuck. "She was trying to manipulate me into doing something I didn't want to do. She wanted me to get close to you, to push you away, so that she could take everything from you. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as I processed his words. I shook my head, not understanding. What are you talking about? She came to you? To push me away? The pieces weren't fitting together, and the shock was beginning to turn into anger. Are you telling me she never loved me? That all of this was some kind of scheme? Alex ran a hand through his hair, his expression a mix of guilt and regret. I didn't want to believe it at first, but after a while it became clear. She was using me, manipulating me to get what she wanted. I don't know what happened to her, but it wasn't just about us. She wanted to break you down, make you feel alone and helpless, and I played into it. I leaned back in the booth, my mind reeling. The betrayal wasn't just from Alex anymore. It was from Jessica too, but not in the way I had thought. She hadn't just cheated on me. She had been playing a deeper game, one I hadn't even seen coming. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had trusted with everything, had been pretending all along. I wanted to believe that Alex was lying, that he was trying to cover up his own guilt. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the pieces fit. Jessica had always been distant, always seemed to pull away when I needed her most. It wasn't just a love affair. There was something more sinister at play. She had been plotting, manipulating, and I had been too blind to see it. What do you want from me? I finally asked, my voice colder than I intended. Alex looked at me, his eyes full of remorse. I want you to know the truth. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't want to be a part of this, whatever it was. But I couldn't keep living with this lie. Not anymore. You need to confront her. Find out what she's really been up to. The weight of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been living in a fog, trying to understand why things had gone so wrong. But now I knew. I was a pawn in her game, just like Alex. She had planned this, had manipulated us both, and I had to find out why. I left the bar with a new sense of clarity, but it was a bitter one. The pain of betrayal was nothing compared to the anger that was building inside me. Jessica had betrayed not just my trust, but my entire understanding of who she was. She wasn't the woman I had married. She wasn't even the woman I had loved. Now I had to confront her, to demand answers. But I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I was walking into a storm, and I had no idea what I would find when I reached the eye of it. I couldn't shake off the heaviness in my chest after that night. The truth that Alex had revealed left me with more questions than answers. It was as if the foundation of everything I knew had been ripped out from under me. Jessica, the woman I had loved, had been playing a much more dangerous game than I could have ever imagined. In the days following our confrontation, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Her smile, her laugh, all of it felt like a lie now. It wasn't just the affair. It was her manipulation, her deceit. I had trusted her, given her everything, and now it felt like she had been orchestrating my downfall all along. I knew I had to confront her. I couldn't let this linger, not when I was drowning in questions and anger. But the closer I got to facing her, the more doubts crept in. What if Alex was lying? What if he had an ulterior motive? What if this was all just an elaborate scheme to ruin me? I sat at the kitchen table, my hands shaking as I gripped my coffee cup. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Jessica, and for a moment, I hesitated. Should I answer? Should I hear what she had to say? After everything, could I trust anything she said? I took a deep breath and swiped open the message. Can we talk? Please. I need to explain everything. The simple words sent a pang of doubt through me. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that there was still a chance for us, that this wasn't all as sinister as it seemed. But the other part of me, the part that was betrayed, wanted nothing more than to shut her out and walk away forever. Every second that passed made me more uncertain of what to do. But I knew one thing for sure. I had to hear her out. I needed the truth. So I replied, I'll meet you, but I'm done with the lies, Jessica. This is the last time we talk about this. I could almost feel the weight of her sigh on the other side of the screen. The message came back almost instantly. I understand. Just, please, meet me. The meeting was set for later that evening. My stomach churned with nerves, but I couldn't turn back now. I drove to her apartment, each mile feeling like a countdown to the inevitable. When I arrived, she was waiting outside, her face pale, her eyes red as if she had been crying. She was holding a small envelope in her hands, one I hadn't seen before. A piece of paper, perhaps a letter or some kind of evidence, but I wasn't sure. "Let's get this over with," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't respond, only nodded and led me inside. I could feel the weight of the silence between us, and it suffocated me as we sat down on the couch. There was a tension in the air, something almost electric. I knew this wasn't just going to be another round of apologies. This time, there would be no excuses. "I've been lying to you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But not in the way you think." I raised an eyebrow, the words hanging in the air like a ticking bomb. "Then explain it to me, Jessica. Explain why you did what you did. Why you manipulated me, why you—" She cut me off, her hands trembling as she reached into the envelope and pulled out a letter. "I was trying to protect you. I thought if I pushed you away, if I made you think you couldn't trust me, you would never find out what I was really protecting you from." The words hit me like a slap. "What the hell are you talking about?" Jessica took a shaky breath, her face pale as she unfolded the letter. "I was trying to protect you from my family, from what they were planning. They wanted you out of the picture, they wanted to take everything from you. And they thought that if they could break us, they'd have the opportunity to destroy you." I sat back, stunned, unable to process what she was saying. This was a whole new layer to the betrayal, one I hadn't expected. My mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. This wasn't just a relationship gone wrong. This was something deeper, more dangerous. Her family had been involved in this scheme all along, and I had been too blind to see it. "You're telling me your family—" I couldn't finish the sentence. The weight of it all was too much to absorb. Jessica nodded, her eyes pleading with me to understand. "They were manipulating me, too. I didn't want to hurt you, but I was scared. I didn't know what else to do." I stared at her, my mind reeling. There was a sick feeling in my gut, a feeling that everything was falling apart faster than I could control. My anger had reached a boiling point, but now, it wasn't just directed at her. It was directed at the forces behind her, the people who had been orchestrating this nightmare. "So, you decided to destroy everything we had instead of trusting me?" I asked, my voice cracking with frustration. She nodded again, tears streaming down her face. "I thought if I kept you away, they'd leave you alone. But I was wrong. I should have told you the truth. I should have trusted you. But now the trust was gone. The damage was done. What could I do with this new revelation? Was it too late for us to salvage anything? And more importantly, was I ready to take on the people who had been pulling the strings from the shadows?" As I sat there, grappling with the weight of her confession, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The fight had shifted, and I was no longer just fighting for my marriage. I was fighting for my life. The forces against me were bigger than I ever imagined, and they weren't going to stop until they had everything. But now I was ready. The stakes had never been higher, and I was done running. The confrontation with Jessica had set the stage for what was to come. I had a new enemy, one far more dangerous than I had realized, and I was determined to face them head-on. The final confrontation with Jessica's family came faster than I expected. After our conversation, I spent the next few days gathering every ounce of courage I had left. Couldn't go back. Couldn't let them win. This had stopped being about Jessica and me. It was about something far bigger. The family that had tried to ruin me, to strip me of everything I'd worked for, was now going to face the consequences of their actions. It was a cold, crisp evening when I stood in front of their sprawling mansion, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and determination. The fog rolled in from the lake, adding a layer of eeriness to the scene. I wasn't here for closure. I wasn't here to make peace. I was here to take back control. I rang the doorbell, and the tension in my chest tightened with each passing second. I had no plan beyond confronting them, but I knew that I couldn't be passive anymore. It was time to stop being their pawn. The door creaked open, and there she was, Jessica's mother. the mastermind behind the manipulation. Her cold eyes locked onto mine, as if she were looking through me, sizing me up. "You think you can just barge into our lives and ruin everything?" She spat, crossing her arms. I stood firm, forcing the words past the lump in my throat. "No, I'm here to stop you from destroying everything I've worked for." Her gaze flickered, but she didn't step back. "You're too late. We've already won. Jessica was the key, and now you're just a nuisance." I could feel the weight of the years of deceit bearing down on me, the anger bubbling to the surface. But there was something else there, too: clarity. The truth had already been revealed. The lies had unraveled. And now all I had to do was put an end to it. I walked past her into the grand hallway, determined not to let her words, or the opulence around me, intimidate me. This was no longer about survival. This was about setting things right. As I entered the study, I saw Jessica standing near the fireplace, her face pale. She wasn't surprised to see me, but there was a new wariness in her eyes. She didn't speak, but I saw the faintest flicker of guilt behind her gaze. And in that moment I knew I had to make a decision. I could walk away from this, but that would mean letting her family continue to manipulate me and tear us apart. Or I could stay, face the chaos, and fight for what was mine. I took a deep breath and turned to face Jessica's mother. "You can't keep doing this," I said, my voice steady. "I'm done being your victim. I'm done being the pawn in your game." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out. But instead, she took a slow step back, her expression one of realization. The power she'd thought she had over me was slipping. "I don't want to fight anymore," Jessica said quietly from behind me. "I don't want to be a part of this." The silence that followed was deafening. I had a choice: to leave this place, this toxic world behind, or to stay and fight for everything that I had left. I looked at Jessica and then at her mother, at the people who had tried to destroy me, and made my decision. "I'm not going anywhere," I said firmly. "This ends now." In that moment, I understood that the battle wasn't just with them. It was with myself. I had to reclaim my power, my self-worth, and my future. And whether I walked away or stayed and fought, I knew I could finally make the decision that would shape the rest of my life. Jessica's family had tried to tear me apart, but now I was whole again. And no matter what came next, I was ready to face it, head on. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The tension that had once suffocated me was slowly replaced by a sense of relief. A relief I hadn't known I needed until I felt it. The drama with Jessica's family didn't end instantly. It wasn't some fairy tale resolution, but the battle had been won, and the weight of it was finally lifting. Jessica and I, after so much turmoil, were left standing together in the wreckage of our past. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of clarity. We both knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still wounds to heal and trust to rebuild, but we had a shared understanding now. We had been through hell, and somehow we had come out the other side. Her mother and the rest of the family, while never fully accepting responsibility for their actions, had begun to back off. It wasn't that they had changed, but they knew now that their control over us was gone. Their influence had crumbled under the weight of our defiance. It wasn't a victory of revenge, but a victory of reclaiming my own voice. The world around me felt different. I no longer saw it through the lens of someone who had been manipulated, someone whose identity had been stripped away. I began to remember who I was before the chaos, the person I had been before all the lies and manipulation took root. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living on my own terms. For Jessica, there was still the task of figuring out who she was without the influence of her family. She hadn't yet fully realized the damage they had done to her, but I saw the cracks forming. It would take time, but I was patient. I understood now that our paths didn't have to align perfectly for us to move forward together. I had my own journey, and she had hers. And, for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of what would come next. I thought back to everything that had led us here, the manipulation, the betrayal, the fear, and realized that it had all been part of a larger lesson. The price of silence, of submission, had been steep. But in facing those demons, I had discovered the strength I'd been denying within myself. The moral, though never spoken aloud, was clear to me. Never allow anyone to dictate your worth. The moment you lose sight of who you are, the world becomes a place where others can take what they want. But when you stand up for yourself, when you reclaim your truth, everything changes. As I sat on the balcony that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson, I realized that, despite everything, I had won. Not in the way I had initially imagined, not with fury or vengeance, but by simply standing my ground, by reclaiming my power. The last thing I thought before I turned inside was this: sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves, and winning them is the only way to truly be free. And with that, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. Because now, for the first time, I was finally free.